Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Academic Writing and Research. Today, we're going to continue talking about narrowing our research topic, and we're going to talk about John Swale's Creating a Research Space Model. So, today, we're going to talk about how writers refine research topics, and we're going to explore the CARS model. In our next video, we're going to talk about focusing our research questions, and we're going to continue our skills work with subject-verb agreement. So I want you to think about what makes a strong research topic. Well, I hope it's something that's timely, something that is currently being explored in the literature. Perhaps it's something that's very significant but is underexplored. And when we're looking at choosing a topic, what do you do? How do you figure out what it is that you want to write about? I think very often young researchers say, I want to do something I'm passionate about. I'm going to spend 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 years studying this. It has to be something I love. And I understand that. And hopefully you can find something that you are passionate about. But if you're doing this for a doctorate or even for a master's, I would encourage you to keep in mind that you want to do something that's feasible, because spending a lot of years doing something that you're passionate about that you don't finish can be a very frustrating experience. I'm speaking from firsthand experience. So when I went back to finish my doctorate after my first attempt was not successful, my goal was I want to find a topic that's feasible. It wasn't something I really loved. It was something I was interested in, but it wasn't exactly what I loved, but it was something I knew I could finish. After you finish your doctorate, then go out and change the world. Find something that you're really passionate about and work hard at it. But make sure you get to that finish line first. So where do we begin? Remember that research starts with a question, not an answer, right? We're going to pose a question. Hopefully it's one that is relevant and has been underexplored in the literature. And then we're going to gather data to answer that question. So remember our OMRAD approach, our introduction. We're trying to figure out, where does our research fit? And that's really what we're focusing on today with the CARS model. Then our methods, how can I study this? Our results, what data, what does this data say? How does it answer the questions? And then we're going to interpret those results. How does this contribute to the wider body of scholarship? So remember, we want to start with a broad topic and then we're going to focus it. Okay, so we're going to start with something we're curious about. It's not necessarily we're starting with this clear thesis, we're refining it and we're getting closer to that clear thesis. And all this is happening while we're exploring prior studies. Remember, academics who've gone before us, they're going to indicate areas for future research, directions for future research. That's a great clue for you to figure out, okay, where am I going with my research? So remember, sometimes we pose a topic that is so narrow, we simply can't get the data to answer it. And sometimes the topic is so broad that, wow, we don't really have a good research question because the topic's too broad. So we're going to take a look at an example of what's been studied, and then we're going to look at a broad idea and we're going to talk about how we can focus that a little bit. So here we've got a short excerpt where we're talking about previous studies. And it says, in recent years, researchers have explored how physical environments affect productivity and mood. Some studies examine libraries, co-working spaces, or minimalist workspaces. A smaller body of research touches on how ambiance, lighting, background music, and decor affects focus. However, there's limited research on how the growing trend of aesthetic cafes, designed for Instagram appeal, intersects with student study habits. Interesting. Especially in urban areas where students increasingly use these cafes as preferred workspaces. Wow, okay, that's interesting. So, our researcher comes up with a really broad topic and says, I'm interested in how aesthetic cafes influence how people study. Whew. Very, very broad. So, first of all, let's go back to previous studies. What's already been studied? Well, research is Researchers have explored how physical environments affect productivity and mood. And they've examined libraries, co-working spaces, and minimalist workspaces. So, what makes this topic too broad? Well, I'm not sure how you're going to find something you can measure to answer this question. I'm interested in how aesthetic cafes influence how people study. What about aesthetic cafes? The seating, the noise levels, the lighting, the layout. What specifically? Their location in an urban environment, a suburban environment, a rural environment, and it affects how people study. What does that mean? How people study? How do we measure how people study? When a topic's too broad, the problem that I just posed here is how are we going to measure what we need to measure to answer this question? So this is very, very broad. We're going to need to refine this. So what you can do is you can work together, or you can work on your own and think about how you can narrow this focus to get a more refined topic. In doing so, you can think about maybe what group can you study? Maybe it's first semester freshmen. What aspect of cafe design or environment in particular are we focusing on? So, like I said, seating, location, urban, rural, suburban, lighting, layout, the sound levels. And what kind of data or what method is going to help us to answer this question? Uh, you know, I we could take a variety of approaches with this. I think this would be a great case study. It'd be perhaps a great bounded case study, working maybe with several first semester freshmen in an urban environment. So let's talk a little bit about the CARS model. This is developed by John Swales, a very, very popular model, and it appears in a lot of graduate students writing courses. CARS stands for Creating a Research Space, and there are three moves in the CARS model. The first is establishing territory. The second is establishing a niche, and the third is occupying that niche. So let's look at each. So first, when we're establishing territory, we need to, within this move, we need to first create centrality. Okay, so we want our audience, our discourse community that we're writing for, to understand that this topic is of central importance. And to do this, we're going to use language like recent interest in has been widespread, or knowledge of is significant for. We want to make generalizations about this topic. We're making a statement about current knowledge in the field. X has been commonly shown, or it's widely accepted that. And then we're going to review prior research. So, what's been done and who's done it? Roberts argued, or several studies have suggested. So, we saw all of that when we looked at that previous excerpt on those internet cafes or those aesthetic cafes. Then, when we're establishing our niche, here we're opening up our space for future work. And Swales has four suggestions, and the approach that you take is going to depend on the university you're at. It's going to depend on the degree level that you're studying, whether you're studying for a master's or a doctorate. And most importantly, it's going to depend on your advisor and your committee. If you're doing your master's research, your master's thesis, or your doctoral dissertation, remember, whatever your committee says, that's what you want to do. Don't argue with them, just do what they say. So, as you establish your niche, you're going to want to work together with those people. So, one approach may be refuting prior findings. While Smith found X, further examination indicates that this finding may be flawed. We may want to explore a gap in the literature. This is going to be most common if you're pursuing a doctorate. You're going to find an area of the research that hasn't been fully explored. Well, previous studies have examined X. Y remains relatively unexplored. We might answer additional questions that have been posed by prior research. And this is very often something that we could find in another academic's future directions for research. Well, Thomas established X. This finding raises a number of additional questions. This is another approach you may choose to take as a doctoral student. And again, that's going to depend on your university and your advisor. And finally, you might choose to replicate a previous study to confirm prior findings. This is usually not acceptable in doctoral research because you want to make a novel contribution to academia. But again, it depends on your university and your advisor. So prior studies suggest X. To verify these findings, more work is urgently needed. So when we're occupying our niche, we're moving into the research space that we created, and we're indicating the purpose of our study. So we'll say things like this study explores, the present research tries to clarify, this paper describes. Okay, now this is something that we're going to say in our introduction of our thesis or a dissertation. If you're writing an abstract to present at a conference, you will likely announce your principal findings if you've gotten that far in your research. So you'll say the results of this study suggest when X was examined, Y was discovered. So let's take a look at these three moves in cars. Okay, so here the author has established a territory, a niche, and occupied that niche. So let's look at which excerpt matches with which move within the CARS process. So I look at the first excerpt. It says, well, several studies have addressed food sustainability and urban agriculture. So right away I see several studies, and then I see the next part of that sentence says, little has been written about. Right there, I know that that researcher is establishing a niche. In the second excerpt, it says, this study explores how urban foragers in Toronto understand and respond to local regulations. So this study explores. Right there, I know that your study is occupying a niche that you've already established. And then in the last excerpt, he says, over the last decade, urban foraging, gathering edible plants from city parks and green spaces, has become a growing movement in North America. Okay, right there, you're establishing the territory for your research. So I highlighted all those different stock phrases that the author uses, and those are the clues that help me to understand which move within the CARS process the author is utilizing there. So remember, it's important to understand these moves and to understand how we can effectively create them in our introduction, because we're going to want to move through that same process when we present our research to our advisors. Okay, so we're going to continue with finding a research gap in our next video. So if you haven't already, please remember to like, subscribe, and comment on my channel. If you subscribe to my channel, you will get all of my videos on academic writing and research. And I'll see you in our next video at the Language Arts Gallery.